The aim of tonight's video is to help you relax or fall asleep. So make sure you're in a comfortable space, a safe area, ideally your bed or on a sofa in a nice cozy seat. Please don't listen to this video while driving or operating heavy machinery or doing anything delicate, just in case your concentration slips. After all, if we hope to relax, any activity where your concentration is required is definitely not compatible with the theme of today's video. So make sure that you're safe, secure, and ultimately comfortable. Before I get to the story, let's make sure that we're all in the right sort of space for a nice, calm, relaxing video. For now, feel free to keep your eyes open, or closed if you prefer. And I want you to take a nice, deep breath in through the nose. And if you can, breathe in to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it for 4, 2, 3, 4. And exhale for 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Great. Just make sure to keep taking in a deep breath, hold it, and then exhale at your own pace. Make sure you're breathing in through your nose and then out through your mouth. Now that we're all in the right frame of mind, you can return to breathing however makes you feel most comfortable, and we can begin. You and your party have been travelling for several days now, where your adventure started as your cosy little hometown, not much more than a village, some might say. You love its very familiar cobbled streets, the many crooked wooden houses, plastered in a crisp, clean, white colour, often painted by the denizens of your town with interesting floral patterns, matching the pansies, daisies, roses and more that grow beneath the windowsills of each of the little cottages that some of you may have called home. It feels like a long time since you and your party gathered in the Golden Kettle Tavern, cozying up to its warm, crackling fire, enjoying the sweet, syrupy meads and freshly baked breads that the tavern owner and their partner tend to bake every weekend. The adventurer's life has been slow, and while not necessarily unlucrative, has been enough for you to get by without great struggles, although the call for adventure has always been in your heart. So, when the local librarian approached you and your group to take magical text, tomes, and scrolls all the way to the illustrious Mage College in Sanctivium, the capital city, the opportunity to explore and to travel, despite removing you from your familiar surroundings and your regular quests of removing giant rats from basements, well, it seemed like too good of an opportunity to pass up, especially for a hefty purse of gold as your reward. But then, for you, a good deed is its own reward, and you know that the students of the Mage College could definitely benefit from some of these tomes. You're not familiar with all of them, but you've heard of some of the authors. And besides, the librarian is a close personal friend, a very jolly halfling called Fizzlewick, and your adventuring party are the only local ones with such a mighty and majestic steed as yours, capable of carrying such tomes the long distance to the big city. So naturally, you accepted. and packed up all of your things, bundled them onto the back of your mighty steed, Crumpet, the Shire horse, who had been one of your closest friends for many years. And while initially reluctant to travel on such a great journey, you know that Crumpet can easily be bartered with the application of a particularly sweet carrot, or 3. It had been several days since you set off for your adventure, your rucksacks full of treats, tools, and provisions, each of you and your friends well stocked and ready for the long journey south. The first few days had been somewhat uneventful. A cosy autumnal walk on well-trodden paths, occasionally met by the odd goblin crew or two, set upon, perhaps, by a band of kobolds, who posed your party little threat, and were a welcome distraction from the wizard of your party, almost constantly searching the nearby hedges and bushes for potion-making ingredients. But you didn't begrudge him. It had been a long time since any of you had left your little village, and the opportunity to gather fresh ingredients is something that almost no wizard can pass up. You were glad to have him at your side, especially when travelling to a mage college of some repute. The third, or perhaps 4th day in, it had started to gently rain, not something that you, in your warm, cosy cloak and travelling attire, were not prepared for, but you and the party were concerned that Crumpet, who, volunteering to carry the books to their final destination, might find difficult to traverse on the increasingly muddy path as the rain started to get heavier. Following the advice of your ranger friend, you decided that it might be a good time to set up a camp and wait out the rain a little in a nearby forest. She mentioned that the forests around this area once were home to wood elves, who called it Kalarayesh in their own tongue. While she couldn't quite remember what this meant, you know enough Elvish to presume that the area must have meant something in the neighbourhood of the grove of tranquil trees, a fitting place to have an evening's nap. Following the expert advice of your ranger friend, you and your party wander off the muddy path as the rain starts to get stronger, into a clearing between some very mighty and very ancient-looking trees, while the elves of this area had long since moved on in their nearly timeless lives. The towering strength of the surrounding trees made you feel like some of these people had left a piece of themselves behind, just to be your guardians for the evening, to watch over you and keep you safe, at least, from the rain. The damp splashing of the now quite heavy rainfall on the muddy path that you left seems to have turned into a now far more tranquil, graceful pitter-patter as the many rain droplets strike the curling and cloak-like leaves of the great trees surrounding you, breaking their fall and allowing little bits of the rain to slide down their long and thick leaves onto those below, creating a beautiful orchestra of verdant percussion all around you. The bark of these great trees swirls in unusual patterns, not like the usual wood grain of the oaks or pines that you might be more familiar with. These seem to be ironbark trees, special among the elves. Their bark is flush and pale white, almost silvery in some lights, with a faint glittering, and while their leaves are incredibly thick, creating a dense canopy above you, you can tell that the sun is setting somewhere, because all of these sparkling trees are beginning to reflect faint amounts of purple, magenta, amber, and yellow throughout the entire forest. Looking more closely, you can see beautiful moths and little frogs enticed out by the wet weather, hopping onto the sturdy branches of this Damascus steel-like tree. And as the sun sets even further, getting darker and darker into this protective forest, The glow of a few chubby little fireflies seemed to dance around the bushes around your encampment. Speaking of which, your allies have already started to set up tents. You made an agreement early on in your adventures that you would take the first night's watch, and in exchange, your allies would set up tents on your behalf. It had never really been your skill set. You're much more the kind of person to want to have their bedroll out in the open by the campfire and look up at the stars. But with the addition of a few droplets of rain still just about managing to make it through the tree canopy, you thought you'd take them up on their offer this time to unfurl tents and set them up on your behalf. Besides, you're always a bit more of a night owl anyway, and could stand taking the first watch. Gwen, the halfling of the party, had taken the liberty of starting a very cosy and now crackling campfire in the middle of a clearing, something that Crumpet has capitalised on instantly by laying down next to it and warming themselves, inviting you over to lay next to them and cozy up. The Ranger's Moonsaber, a purplish, tiger-like mount, has also taken the liberty of curling up into the warmest spot possible, and with a deep, deep stretch and a yawn that seemed to open her whole head, showing some very vicious-looking fangs, has now started to purr so deeply and so loudly that it almost goes against her nature as a stealthy hunter. But you've known Violet for long enough to realise that her satin-like fur isn't the softest thing about her. She's more like a very protective and extremely cuddly house cat underneath all of those silvery stripes across her back. Gwen beckons you over to the fire, and the sweet smell of cinnamon gently caresses your nostrils as you realise with glee that she is concocting one of her most magical of potions, a rich and silky concoction of warm oat milk, of glittering brown sugar, and a mixture of spices that she calls her secret formula, that, while you can't tell all of its ingredients, the aroma of cinnamon and nutmeg seem to be a dead giveaway. She's been stirring this mix in a small copper pot above the fire that she made, and has graciously started pouring these into mugs for each of the group. But as the first of the night's watch tonight, you have the luxury of enjoying this multi-drink, and having the heavy responsibility of being the first to taste test it. Such burdens are difficult to bear, but you can just about manage such a lofty responsibility as you take your favourite mug, which isn't too hot, at least not at the bottom, with a wide, rough ceramic base, curling in to a smooth and glossy top, and feels just comfortable in your hand, warm enough to stave off the rain that had found its way onto your cloak from the walk before, but not so hot as to be burning you. It tastes just as good as you remember. You can feel it spreading throughout your whole body, warming your throat and your stomach, all the way down to your fingertips, passing your knees, and all the way down to your tiniest toes in your boots. Maybe there is something magical about this concoction. It feels like the weight of all the clothes that you've been carrying in your rucksack, and even the weight of your responsibilities, has been lifted as if by a feather's fall spell. This batch definitely gets your seal of approval. Mira, the paladin, sits just away from the fire, outside her tent, a white and crimson affair. Illuminated gently by the campfire, she begins to doff her armour, something which she asks for your assistance in, as she always seems to have trouble with the shoulder pads. She remarks that very few blacksmiths choose to put the clips at the back of an adventurer's armour nowadays, but she preferred the additional security that offers, even if it does require a friend or two to help remove those particular pauldrons. She thanks you graciously and offers you a seat next to her while she begins to sharpen her greatsword after today's encounters. She brings out what looks like a palm-sized whetstone and begins to gently glide it across the edge of the sword with a precision and meditative grace that gives you the impression that not only has she done this many times before, but perhaps that this is something to do with the rituals and rites of her faith. She tells you about how protecting the innocent, and in particular her close friends like yourself, is the most important thing to her, and you couldn't agree more. Mira is a woman of few words, but a poet on the battlefield, and a surgeon with a greatsword. And while the conversation drifts into silence, you know that it is a comfortable silence, not born out of insecurity, but quite the opposite, a comfortable silence of not feeling the pressure to occupy all ambient moment with a rush of conversation. You know that this silence, beset on both sides by the crackling of the warm fire and the gentle tinkling of a few slow raindrops hitting Mira's armour, like the corrugated roof of your shed back home in the village, is a sign that she is truly happy to be in your company, a gift seldom earned by many of the people we meet, and is all the more reason why you are glad to have her at your side. Your attention is drawn to the other side of the fire, where the wizard of your party, Melvin, has, instead of erecting a tent, been casting protective wards and runes around your campsite. As most wizards tend to be, he's a bit of an oddball. His long purple robe and very extravagant moustache are both completely covered in bauble, which jingle slightly as he moves around the camp, sometimes removing the bauble from his handlebar moustache, which extends a fair few inches away from each side of his face, to be placed on various branches. These then begin to gently hum and glow, and you know that some kind of shielding spell has been cast over the campfire, and you know you'll be able to sleep easy tonight. Curious, as always, about the goings-on of Melvin's scattered mind, you approach him as, with an elegant twirl, his robe magically transforms into a nightgown and a very, very soft-looking nightcap, atop which seems to float a, let's say, well-loved candle nearing the end of its wick. As you muse for a second as to how the flame seems to continuously burn, even though Melvin does seem to be moving around quite a lot, he begins to scribe even more intricate runes in a circle that seems to be about 10 feet wide, placing on each of the corners of a peculiar shape that he draws within the circle some of the various plant clippings and berries that he found on your journey. He raises his hands to the sky, and as if struggling with a heavy weight that you can't quite see, he slowly and shakily brings his hands down to the ground to touch this runic circle. As he does so, a plume of teal smoke, which smells peculiarly of bubblegum, drifts into the sky, and as it clears, you can see that a very interesting tent seems to have formed in the space where the ring once existed. On its side, you can see two, presumably, glass windows, despite the texture of the tent definitely being fabric. The windows don't seem to look into the tent, but instead reflect a night sky with an aurora, something that, through the canopy of the trees, you certainly cannot see. Atop this tent seems to be a replica of Melvin's own wizard's hat, although the scale seems like it would fit the entire tent, and could probably fit the entire party inside. Sticking out of the very top of this tent, and I guess a wizard's hat, seems to be a very crooked chimney, out of which billows a faint wisp of smoke. As Melvin walks towards the buttoned-up entrance, the buttons graciously unfurl themselves before him, and a welcome mat, which says, "Not all those who wander are lost," unfurl like a tongue from the mouth of this tent. He beckons you inside, and while your initial reaction is somewhat furtive, you've known Melvin for long enough to realise that while peculiar, he is a very gentle and very kind soul, and an extremely good listener. As you enter the tent, you are somewhat surprised that its contents are much larger on the inside than they seem to be on the out. Melvin is somewhat famous in your community for playing with spatial dimensions, something that the local villagers believe has shattered his fragile mind, but, as Melvin might say, it's merely opened his horizons, and his horizons have allowed for some fairly peculiar decor on the inside of this tent. An intricately detailed but slightly moth-eaten rug occupies the majority of the space, but whereas the outside of this tent looks like it was made of fabric, the inside is oddly reminiscent of his workshop back home, with wood-panelled floors and a library of books, texturing every wall like wallpaper. The bubbling fragrance of chemicals draws your attention to the gently glowing alchemy set in the corner, and while enticing, you know well enough to steer clear of Melvin's concoctions, lest you accidentally get transformed into a toad like last time. In one corner of this ever-expanding room, a four-poster bed springs seemingly out of one of the bookcases, and Melvin has a forward roll to match the end of the bedpost and jumps somewhat excitedly into the covers. With a of his wand, a nearby sofa folds out into a futon, and he offers you a place to sleep, but you remark that it's your turn for the first watch, and while it is incredibly cozy and warm in here, with the gentle bubbling of the alchemy kit, and the chirping of his peculiar songbird in its cage next to it, singing a gentle lullaby in the most beautiful and kind-hearted voice that you think you may have ever heard, you know that you need to get back to your duties. You're not quite sure how much of your explanation that you offered sunk in to Melvin's mind, because you were cut off by the deepest snoring that you think you've ever heard, much more so than Violet, cuddled up around the campfire, and you think it's probably best to leave Melvin to what he's doing. As soon as you exit his tent, the sounds from within fade to almost nothingness in the mouth of his tent, and the tongue-like welcome mat furl back in so none of the rest of the group need to hear his snoring, which, honestly, sounded a bit like a hippopotamus gargling gravel. But you're glad to see that even though he's asleep, his protective wards are still humming and glowing around the campsite, keeping the group safe. With that said, you fold out a cozy, squishy garden chair that Gwen has very thankfully been warming next to the fire. Next to Crumpet for you, another mug of her special milky, cinnamony concoction sits next to it, and you take your seat next to Crumpet, who, without moving too much, gently sidles up next to you, pressing their neck against your leg in a sign of comfort and solidarity, as you begin to tussle your fingers through their silky mane, listening to the purring of Violet just across from you, and the clicking and popping of the perfectly warm campfire at your feet. The gentle chirping of crickets can be heard in the distance, and you listen to the gentle tapping of the rain overhead, being caught in the canopy of leaves far above you, knowing very well that under your watchful eye, this group couldn't be safer in this old sylvan forest. As you relax very deeply, the ranger of your party wanders over and mentions that they have a few rituals to perform, and that while they appreciate your sentiments and your efforts, they don't feel as tired as you, and they offer to let you rest, something that after a few sips of Gwen's very cosy formula is sounding more and more appealing. So you take them up on their generous offer and cozy up into your nice warm tent, keeping the mouth open so that you can see the campfire and hear the pitter-patter of rain still gently dancing around the camp as your eyes get heavier and heavier and you roll over, feeling cozier and cozier. You feel safe enough and calm enough that resting your eyes and your mind seem like a fine thing to do, and to ready yourself for your journey ahead, which you can allow yourself to do as the rain continues to gently patter around your nice, warm, safe tent. And with that, I wish you a lovely evening, a relaxing rest, and pleasant dreams, so that you might rest, be well equipped for your adventures ahead. And if you're still listening, and you've managed to stay awake so far, then thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. I hope that you'll enjoy the next little while I let the rain sounds continue to help you drift off to sleep. And until next time, happy Constante. Good night.